Horizon just almost UX, and this jet terrified the West, the MiG-25 FOXBAT. Based by Shah Mustard. Yes, this is an insane channel that apparently I find out. It's a big channel. It's surprising that I didn't found this out before, but apparently it's like, big level type of channel that, let's just say, real life lore type of thing. I don't know. I don't know how to say this, but obviously, the channel who covers things like this, jets and things, in really well, and composed manner. I'm pretty sure like there is no other video that even come close to this who explains the MiG-25 FOXBAT just based on the views. I haven't watched it, but it's like a 10 million views, and there is like barely half a million things like that. So I'm guessing like this is a really good video. I've seen the F-15 video, which was insane. The whole thing, the development of it, like they thought the MiG-25 FOXBAT was like this, like a dogfighting type of a plane, which I think it was made as an interceptor, not that, so it's a different purpose. But they thought that was the case, and they just hyped it up, right? Interceptor plane has to be some like a heavy hitting, like fast plane. So they knew that that was the capability of FOXBAT, but they just assumed this for the dogfighting. So that just changes the whole landscape. Like if you're gonna be that fast and that kind of a plane when it comes to dogfighting, which means you're too insanely powerful. That's what they assumed. And they made something that is better than that, which was F-15. Then realized that MiG-25 was never that. So they beat the fictional plane that never existed. Yeah, so this is like really heavy hitting plane, but it's mostly for intercepting, as far as I can remember from that video. Intercepting what, I don't know, but I guess this video will tell us. I'm pretty sure India has MiG-25s as well. I'm pretty sure I heard of that somewhere. Yeah, obviously India has a lot of Russian equipment, so it probably has it. I don't know. I really don't know, in the Soviet arsenal, which is like the most powerful planes, which makes, or I think there's also a series called Su, right? Su this, Su that, I don't know. I don't know the designation of that. Obviously, I know about the F series and things like that, the American side, but yeah, I really need to check that out. And I don't know how many of them India has it, like which capability, I don't know. But it's gonna be fun. Let's watch it. Remember, people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, so that way I know which type of videos to react to more. I've done quite a few military style videos like this, mostly from Fat Electrician. If you haven't seen them, check out the link in the description, there you'll find it, or check out the end card, the end of the video, and let's watch it.
This video was made possible by CuriosityStream. Watch thousands of high-quality documentaries and get access to my streaming service Nebula using the link in the description. In November 1971, two Israeli fighter jets raced to intercept an unidentified aircraft. The F-4 Phantoms are among the fastest fighter jets in the world. But they're not fast enough, because they're chasing a MiG-25, a plane that can fly so fast and high it can outrun any fighter or air defense system. For nearly a decade, the Soviet Union's MiG-25 will remain a complete mystery and leave Western intelligence scrambling for answers.
What? I thought it would be like some few years. It's a decade. The decade is a long time. We are in 2023 right now, by the end of it. Do you remember what was happening? Obviously not the young ones, right? Young ones barely remember shit. Like if you're something like a early teenage, like you would barely remember anything. But anybody who's like around my age, like, nearing 30 or something, do you remember what was happening in 2013, right? I sometimes hear the music, right? That was the hit music around that time. Like, oh yeah, I remember that from 2013. 10 years is a long time. It might not feel like it, but when you really think it, 10 years is an insanely long time. So a decade, especially when something comes to like this, like, oh my God, they have like MiG-25s that our planes can't even touch. And it's like this kind of like, you don't even have much of information. So for something like that to carry on for 10 years, that's a frightening situation.
In the opening years of the Cold War, a new kind of weapon emerged, the intercontinental bomber. An aircraft with enough range to reach nearly any part of the world to deliver a nuclear strike. Ooh. America's first intercontinental bomber not only flew further, it flew higher and faster than any bomber before it, making it extremely difficult to intercept. And it started a decades-long trend of building strategic bombers that flew ever higher and faster. The Soviet Union responded by building increasingly capable fighter interceptors to try and stop them. But by the late 1950s, Soviet intelligence had learned that the Americans were developing a new state-of-the-art bomber that would fly so high and fast, it would render the entire Soviet Air Force virtually obsolete.
Wait a minute, what? 2,000 mile per hour bomber. Look at this size of Valkyrie. So this was what MiG-25 was built to intercept. B-70.
The XB-70 was so cutting edge that only a few years earlier it would have been impossible to build.
that.
But the Americans were aiming to have the bomber ready in just a few short years. For Soviet leadership, a sense of panic set in. As the largest country in the world,
Bombers are supposed to be heavy ass. That's the thing. They're supposed to carry bombs, right? 2,000 miles per hour bomber. Like, that's an insane shit.
there were over 22 million square kilometers of airspace to guard, and at any moment, American bombers could emerge from the north, or from bases in the east, or NATO-allied countries in the west. And only a handful of supersonic bombers would be enough to overwhelm air defenses. The Soviet Union would have just a few short years to design and build a new interceptor to match the incredible performance of the upcoming B-70. It would have to be as fast as Soviet ingenuity could make it, and developed in record time. But to effectively guard the country's enormous airspace, they'd also need to mass-produce the new jet by the hundreds. The MiG-25 was the Soviet Union's answer, an interceptor that would overcome the odds with brute force. To catch the XB-70, engineers would need to equip the MiG with enormously powerful engines, but there wouldn't be time to develop new ones. Instead, they'd make do with a turbojet originally built to power cruise missiles and reconnaissance drones. They were the largest engines ever put on a fighter, but they were essentially disposable. It meant that initial versions of
Damn, okay. So I'm guessing they didn't knew that at the time that this was made as an interceptor, because the feeling I get from Fat Electrician video, obviously anyone who talks about it, like MiG-25 was a dogfighter or something, and they just sucked really badly, and it just makes me think, like, how the Soviet Union does that? I mean, look, I'm not saying Soviet Union was bad, but Soviet Union kept up with the USA in some regards, even beat it, and just like going back and forth. Now that's against USA, right? So you have to be really powerful and badass if you want to do that. So you can think about anything about Soviet Union or Russia or anything of the past, but they've always been like the top level people that rivals USA. That was the whole thing. That was the whole Cold War, right? That they are the one who came up with the rocket formula. They are the one who came up with the chemical table, whatever that is, right? They've been first in many things, right? So you can knock off, Soviet Union like, oh, that was shitty, this and that, but they're not gonna be that bad, right? In this instance, it makes sense that people mistook this for dogfighter and just assume this is a shitty plane, but it was made as an interceptor. Then it makes sense, right? Now, I'm not saying that Russia right now is the same way it was before, but throughout the history, you can't deny the Soviet Union / Russia, whatever, has been that kind of a military powerhouse. With the equipment and everything that even sweats Americans, right? And Americans has always been like a top of at least post World War II, has been like top of the food chain type of people, right? Even that, like when I say people didn't comment, oh, America's not that and this and that, like what you talking about? Of course they are, and nothing come close to it, right? One thing Americans are is just like way above everything, and if you can keep up with them, right, or even in some instance can beat them even for a short while, that's an insane feat.
The MiG had engines with a service life of just 150 hours. At intercept speeds, the MiG-25 would have to withstand serious kinetic heating, with some parts reaching 300 degrees Celsius. But lightweight, heat-resistant titanium was just too difficult to produce on a mass scale. So engineers built the jet largely out of heavy nickel-steel alloy, a material that could be quickly welded together and easily repaired at even the most remote and ill-equipped airbase. But it meant that the more than 40,000-pound jet could never be maneuverable, a characteristic considered irrelevant for its mission. To spot enemy bombers, the MiG-25 was equipped with a colossal 600-kilowatt radar, designed to detect high-flying aircraft up to 100 kilometers away and burn right through their jamming devices. And it would need only one kind of weapon, 4 of the largest air-to-air missiles ever produced. Along with the interceptor, there would also be a dedicated reconnaissance version, with powerful surveillance cameras, increased range, and an even higher service ceiling. Some versions could even be equipped for high-altitude bombing. but the vast majority of MiG-25s would be built as dedicated interceptors. Mass production began in 1969, and at one point, 100 MiG-25s were rolling off assembly lines every single month.
Ooh.
The MiG-25 would fly high.
What? 100 planes in a month? That's a very large number for jet planes, man. I mean, obviously, if you tell that anyone, like, okay, wars are big, equipments are big, so is 100 that long? But the more I, watch this video, I realize, like, how insanely costly the planes can be, especially something like F-15 things. And when you realize, like, they ordered like 30 of them, US Air Force ordered like 50 of them, like okay, that's the total. They order like 50 planes. That's it. That's all you need. Not in a month. They're producing hundreds in a month. Every month. I mean, how many planes did they make? That is insane. I'm guessing they would have sold to people, other countries like India or something in the future if you're going to make that much planes. Because why else would you need it? But they, at the time, they just like made the shit out of them. That's an insane number.
Higher and faster than any combat jet in history. And it would have a profound effect on the Cold War. Just not in the way the Soviets were expecting. In 1967, the Soviet Union put on a massive air show, and they made sure the Americans were watching. The event was even broadcast in English for Western audiences.
Damn,
the Soviets unveiled several new aircraft for the
Soviet Union broadcasting English. Like, what you talking about? We are not doing this so Americans see it. By the way, we are going to broadcast this in English. That is so anti-us.
very first time. But they saved the best for last. In the final 10 minutes, 3 prototype MiG-25s were sent roaring past the audience. It was the first time anyone outside the Soviet Union would see the new aircraft. And for Western intelligence, it set off alarm bells. The grainy footage revealed an aircraft with all the hallmarks of an agile fighter. The unusually large wings suggested extreme maneuverability.
Man, screw the technicality. Just look at the plane. And look at how the other planes look. Like, look at the F4. Like, it has like old styly look to it. And this has the modern styly look for it, right? And imagine them thinking this is a dogfighting type of plane like F4 is, right? They just see that shit roaring past like, oh my god.
Enormous air intakes hinted at massive engines, and experts suspected the use of advanced lightweight titanium. But what worried them the most was that the plane looked eerily similar to concepts for America's next-generation air superiority fighter, a jet that wouldn't be ready for another 10 years. In Washington, military planners struggled to understand how the Soviets could have leapfrogged so far ahead, because only a few months later, the Soviet Union started registering incredible...
I mean, it's not like Soviet came up with like as a rocket technology. You know, a lot of bleeding edge technology that we all use as basis today. It's not like that. I mean, I can understand that. Like, I think the most shock was that intelligence, right? That was intelligence, the only thing that mattered in Cold War. And this implied that intelligence failed, which is like a scary thing.
New records for speed and altitude. And the media soon caught wind, spreading fears that the mysterious new jet could outperform anything built by the West. The U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff even publicly admitted that for the first time, the Soviets had a jet that the United States couldn't match. The perceived threat motivated the U.S. to drastically increase performance targets for its next-generation fighters.
What a plane they made.
But for years, the Americans were desperate for any information they could get. They'd catch another glimpse in 1971 when Israeli radar controllers began tracking MiG-25s over the Sinai Peninsula. The jets were clocked flying at more than 2.5 times the speed of sound and at an altitude of over 20 kilometers. At one point, they even tracked one of the MiGs accelerating beyond Mach 3. But the jets flew so high and fast, no fighter in the world could catch them. For over a decade, the MiG-25 remained a mystery and continued to worry Western intelligence. But that was about to change in the most dramatic way possible. On September 6, 1976, the Soviet Union's most secretive jet showed up seemingly out of nowhere over northern Japan. It then made a dramatic crash landing at a sleepy commercial airport, nearly colliding with an airliner and skidding right off the end of a runway. It was the first time anyone in the West would see a MiG-25 in person. And as curious onlookers gathered, no one seemed to know where it had come from or how it got there. Piloting the MiG was 29-year-old Lieutenant Viktor Bilyenko. He was quickly taken into custody, where he explained that he escaped the Soviet Union to seek asylum in the United States. Disillusioned with life in the Soviet Union and harsh conditions at his airbase, Bilyenko had planned his escape for months. While on a training exercise over the Sea of Japan, he reported engine trouble, giving him a chance to fall back from his group. Bilyenko then descended low enough to evade radar detection. Once out of Soviet airspace, he set course for the nearest Japanese airbase. But with limited fuel and difficulty navigating, he was forced to find the nearest airport. Bilyenko was well aware that his MiG-25 was a prized possession, and he provided invaluable information to Western intelligence, who shipped his MiG to a nearby airbase to examine every inch of it. And they were in for a shock of a lifetime. The MiG-25 obviously wasn't the agile fighter they were expecting. Its heavy stainless steel airframe severely limited maneuverability, and the large wings were needed just to keep the jet airborne. The engines, while powerful enough to exceed Mach 3, couldn't sustain those speeds without permanent damage, meaning the practical limit was around Mach 2.8. The MiG's radar was powerful, but lacked look-down capability, meaning it couldn't track low-flying targets. The compromises that Soviet engineers were forced to make were now glaringly apparent. But they wouldn't have mattered much for intercepting a high-altitude supersonic bomber like the B-70. But the B-70 never made it into production. Instead, the Americans switched their tactics from high-speed, high...
What the fuck, man? They didn't even make it? So they made 100 planes a month, trying to target one specific type of plane. They didn't even make the Valkyries. They overdid that shit. Unlike Americans, right? Americans are so unpredictable that they don't even know what they're going to do, and that alone gives them the edge, right? I'm going to make the Valkyrie. So if they said it, they're going to make it, fuck it, we're just going to go ahead of the curve and just make this shit, right? Make 25s, hundreds per month. It's just like, you know, they're in the Pentagon, they're like, you know what? Yeah, I think we're going to scrap that. There you go. Every single steel and everything is just wasted.
Altitude to low-altitude radar and defense-evading aircraft, leaving Western intelligence perplexed as to why the MiG-25 was produced in such large numbers. The only other aircraft the interceptor would potentially have to guard against were a handful of reconnaissance aircraft. The same media that had once stoked fears about a Soviet superplane now openly mocked the MiG-25 as a...
I mean, wouldn't they work against something like Blackbird? Blackbirds are a spy plane, right? Obviously, Blackbird is faster than MiG-25, but I don't know. No, it won't work against the Blackbird either, right? Maybe in some very specific. So these planes were, I guess, a waste in a way. I don't know.
Crudely built machine that was more or less useless in combat. An inferior aircraft that proved that the Soviets were behind in technology. Bilyenko's defection outraged Soviet leadership, who demanded that he return to the Soviet Union along with the stolen MiG. Instead, Bilyenko was granted American citizenship, while his MiG was sent back to the Soviet Union in dozens of pieces. The Americans had learned everything there was to know about the MiG-25, and they now understood critical components of the Soviet air defense system. With the MiG-25 so thoroughly compromised, Soviet engineers had to work around the clock to modernize the aircraft, equipping the MiG-25 with more powerful and reliable engines, a more sophisticated look-down radar, and the ability to field a wider range of missiles. Meanwhile, older versions of the jet, no longer a closely guarded secret, were exported to other countries. In all, nearly 1,200 MiG-25s were produced. But more than 50 years later, the MiG-25 is still the fastest fighter jet ever built, an aircraft that would set 29 world records. In 1977, a MiG-25...
What do you mean? Isn't Blackbird faster? Isn't that a jet? Or is this doesn't fit some classification? What you talking about? Wait a minute, what?
MiG-25s were produced. But more than 50 years later, the MiG-25 is still the fastest fighter jet ever built, an aircraft that would...
Fighter jet. So I'm guessing Blackbird wasn't a fighter jet. That's why?
Set 29 world records. In 1977, a MiG-25 climbed to an incredible altitude of 123,000 feet, setting a record that still stands today. Although the aircraft had been built to intercept high-altitude bombers, downgraded export versions even saw moderate success in combat. But by the late 1970s, the Soviet Union had moved on.
See, the thing is, like, I'm guessing Soviet Union is like, fuck this shit, and just basically went to make something else. Obviously, that's how they do it, because it was made for a plane that didn't existed. But everything has an application. Like, the pros of these planes, if you like tweak here and there, and I guess apply in a just right situation, it can be a powerhouse. So I guess I understand why India has it right now and things like that, because it is a fast jet, right? In the right hands, like, like I said, one incident with Pakistan, one of the MiGs, I don't know which MiG was it. Was it a MiG-25? I have to Google that. But one of the MiGs took down F-15 very recently against Pakistan and India, right? So it depends, like, who uses it, how you're going to use it, like how you're going to tweak it and modify it, right? It could be proved so valuable, right? And then the main thing is that it was made by cheaper material, nickel and everything. So you can basically just repair it wherever you want. So it's like easier to maintain it, especially with the countries like India, which is like money is an issue, right? Americans like just like money just flows like river at that point. They don't give a shit. They can make 50, millions of F-15, doesn't matter. For something like India, it would make sense to use something like that.
Development of a next-generation interceptor was well underway, a jet that would have cutting-edge avionics, sophisticated engines, and a radar and weapon control system so advanced it could engage multiple targets simultaneously from 100 kilometers away and even link with other fighters to coordinate an attack, in the process instantly upgrading the capabilities of older Soviet fighters. Where the MiG-25's design was about brute force, the new MiG-31 would use the state-of-the-art to become the world's most formidable interceptor. You can learn more about the MiG-31's brilliant engineering in my latest video, now on Nebula. Nebula is where you can watch a growing number of my exclusive videos.
They just modernized the shit. When this was made, man, because it was like 70s or 80s, that would like be surprising. Like even back then, they're thinking of like a 21st century style of thinking. With like, okay, enough of the brute force. We're gonna like modernize this shit. Data links are basically Wi-Fi connection type of shit, right? What is it called? I forgot the name. Like mass network type of shit, right? in your home, when you connect multiple access points, like mesh network things, like they're basically doing that, connecting planes so they can communicate with each other, develop launch multiple missiles to intercept and everything. Damn, that is something. Okay, seriously, what is the F-15 equivalent of a Russian Soviet plane right now? F-35 is just latest plane, but there must be something like, right? There is like F-23, is that it? Because it just sold like F-23 as a support planes, that must be it, right? I don't know. Well, what are the Su planes? I heard of there a lot. Su planes. Like what are they? I don't know. I really need to see. I'm guessing Mustard must have videos about them. I have to check that out. But yeah, I love this series. I don't know, because of factors and suddenly like, oh look at that, isn't this cool? These planes and equipment, and just like I'm in the rabbit hole now. I watch this every day. So yeah. Right, well, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, and yeah, comment down if you want to do any specific reaction, and I'll see you next time.